Here's a full recap of the Book of Clarence, based on its storyline, key events, and themes. Setting and context. The Book of Clarence is set in Jerusalem during the time of Jesus Christ. However, it takes a very different perspective from typical biblical films. The protagonist, Clarence, played by Lakeith Stanfield, is not a follower of Jesus. He's an ordinary man living in the margins of society, trying to survive in a time when religious movements, such as Jesus following, are gaining ground. Clarence is cynical, uninterested in spirituality, and driven by a desire for fame, fortune, and recognition. He sees how Jesus attracts crowds, spreads his message, and builds a movement. In Clarence's eyes, this looks like an opportunity to elevate himself by exploiting people's beliefs. The film follows Clarence's attempts to create his own following and profit from the religious fervor of the time, despite not having any true faith or divine calling. Plot summary. The story begins with Clarence living a fairly unspectacular life in Jerusalem. He's surrounded by people who are becoming drawn to the message of Jesus, a local prophet whose words are spreading across the land. Clarence, however, is indifferent to the religious teachings and views them through a more practical, cynical lens. One day, Clarence sees how Jesus and his disciples manage to gather large crowds, with people willing to follow them in hopes of salvation and miracles. Clarence recognizes the power of influence that religious leaders hold, and he starts thinking, "Why can't I have that?" He decides to create a path to fame and wealth by pretending to be a prophet or a holy figure himself. This sets Clarence on a path filled with manipulation and deceit. He starts imitating the behaviors of the religious figures of the time, trying to convince people that he too can perform miracles and offer spiritual salvation. Clarence adopts the persona of a self-made messiah, even though he has no faith or divine connection. Instead, he fakes his way through performances, staging false miracles, and delivering speeches he doesn't believe in, all in the hopes of getting people to follow him and pay for his supposed blessings. As Clarence's ministry begins to take off, he attracts a small group of followers. He becomes a local celebrity of sorts, much to his satisfaction. However, his rise to fame doesn't come without challenges. Clarence is often confronted by people who see through his schemes and question his authenticity. Some religious figures and political authorities begin to take notice of his fraudulent behavior. These encounters push Clarence into situations where he's forced to keep up his lies, even when the consequences of his actions start to catch up with him. One of the major turning points in the film is Clarence's growing realization that his pursuit of fame and wealth is not fulfilling. He begins to witness the genuine faith of those around him and becomes envious, not of their success, but of the peace and purpose they seem to have in their lives. Clarence, in contrast, feels increasingly empty, even though he's achieved some level of fame. As the plot progresses, Clarence finds himself in a moral crisis. His schemes start to fall apart, and he's faced with the reality that his life of lies has left him spiritually bankrupt. He encounters moments where he could turn toward genuine faith and redemption, but he continues to wrestle with his selfish desires. The climax of the movie comes when Clarence is caught in a situation where he can no longer maintain the façade. His lies are exposed to his followers and the authorities, leading to a downfall that's both humiliating and tragic. The irony of Clarence's life is that while he tried to exploit faith, he never truly found it for himself. His obsession with wealth and fame leaves him broken, isolated, and without the fulfillment he sought. Themes and symbolism. 1. Ambition and greed. Clarence's journey is one driven by his ambition for power, wealth, and status. The film explores the dangers of unchecked ambition and how it can corrupt individuals. Clarence is willing to exploit the faith of others to serve his own goals, leading to his downfall. 2. Faith versus opportunism. The central tension in the film is between genuine faith and Clarence's opportunism. The followers of Jesus and other religious leaders in the film represent true belief and spiritual devotion, while Clarence represents cynicism and the exploitation of those beliefs for personal gain. The movie examines how religion can be a powerful force for both good and manipulation, depending on the intent behind it. 3. Identity and authenticity. Clarence's journey also touches on the search for identity. He spends much of the film pretending to be someone he's not, a prophet, a spiritual leader, when in reality, he's a man lost in his own desires. His inability to be true to himself ultimately leads to his personal crisis. The movie questions what it means to be authentic in a world filled with external pressures to conform to certain roles. 4. Redemption and consequences. While Clarence's story is tragic, the film leaves room for questions about redemption. Can someone like Clarence, who has spent his life lying and deceiving others, find redemption? Or are the consequences of his actions too severe to allow for a second chance? The film doesn't provide easy answers, leaving the audience to reflect on Clarence's journey and its broader implications. 5. Satire and humor. While the film is serious in its exploration of faith and ambition, there's a satirical element that runs throughout. Clarence's over-the-top attempts to mimic religious figures, his staged miracles, and the absurdity of some of his schemes add a comedic layer to the story. This satire highlights the commercialization of religion and the lengths people will go to exploit it. Character development. Clarence Lakeith Stanfield Clarence is the heart of the movie. He's a deeply flawed character, but one who is still somewhat sympathetic. His desperation for recognition and success is something many people can relate to, even though his methods are unethical. As the film progresses, Clarence becomes more introspective, and the audience sees his internal struggle between continuing his deceptive ways and finding some form of redemption. Supporting characters. The movie features a range of supporting characters who serve as foils to Clarence. There are genuine believers and religious leaders who challenge Clarence's falsehoods and try to guide him toward a more honest path. These characters often represent the moral compass of the film, pushing Clarence to question his own motivations. Visual and cinematic style. James Samuel, the director, brings a modern touch to a biblical story. Much like in The Harder They Fall, Samuel uses a stylized approach, blending traditional historical elements with a contemporary sensibility. The film's soundtrack, pacing, and visuals combine ancient Jerusalem with a modern, almost mythical quality. The desert landscapes and bustling city streets are filled with vibrant colors, reflecting both the beauty and the harshness of the time period. The film also plays with visual symbolism. For instance, Clarence's staged miracles often have exaggerated, theatrical effects, highlighting the absurdity of his schemes. This contrasts with the more understated, genuine faith displayed by other characters, visually showing the divide between real belief and Clarence's superficial performances. Conclusion. In the end, the Book of Clarence is a thoughtful, entertaining, and sometimes humorous exploration of faith, ambition, and the human need for recognition. Clarence's story serves as a cautionary tale about the dangers of exploiting belief for personal gain and the emptiness that comes from pursuing fame without a true sense of purpose. The film's unique blend of satire, drama, and revisionist biblical storytelling offers a fresh perspective on a well-worn historical setting, making it a thought-provoking experience for viewers.